They say betrayal comes from those closest to you, and I learned that the hard way. My wife and I had been married for 15 years, and while things weren't perfect, I never thought we'd end up here. I never thought the life I built would be shattered by the two people I thought I could trust the most. It started with small changes: her late night work calls, her new habit of guarding her phone like a teenager hiding secrets, and the way she seemed to light up whenever our daughter's boyfriend, Jake, came around. I chalked it up to her being friendly. Jake had been dating our daughter, Emily, for over a year, and she adored him. He was charming, always helping out around the house, and seemed genuinely invested in her. I liked the guy, until I didn't. The first real crack appeared at Emily's birthday party. We were hosting a small gathering, just family and a few friends. I noticed Lauren, my wife, lingering near Jake a little too often, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then I saw the way she touched his arm, a lingering, almost possessive gesture. It made my stomach churn. Still, I told myself it was nothing. Who was I to question a harmless interaction? After all, we were a family, or so I thought. But the doubts festered. I started paying closer attention, catching stolen glances between them and hushed conversations that ended abruptly when I walked into the room. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia. Then, one night, everything changed. I came home early from a business trip, exhausted but eager to surprise Lauren and Emily. As I walked into the house, the first thing I noticed was the eerie quiet. The second was a pair of men's shoes by the door, Jake's shoes. My heart sank. I made my way upstairs, every step heavier than the last. From the hallway, I could hear voices coming from our bedroom. Her voice. His voice. And then, silence. The kind of silence that screams 1,000 truths. I didn't storm in. Instead, I turned and walked back down the stairs, my mind reeling. I needed proof. Something concrete. I wasn't going to confront them without a plan, without ensuring they paid for what they'd done. And so, the game began. The night I overheard them, I stayed up thinking of everything I'd missed. The stolen glances, the subtle changes in her behavior, and the way Jake always seemed so comfortable in our home. It all clicked into place like pieces of a grotesque puzzle. But I couldn't act on anger alone. No, this required precision. A betrayal like this deserved a response that would leave them both ruined. I began my investigation the next day. Lauren acted as if nothing had changed, giving me her usual morning smile and a kiss on the cheek as I left for work. It was almost laughable how easily she slipped into the role of the loving wife. But I played along, kissing her back and pretending I didn't know. Let her think she'd gotten away with it. At work, I made a call to a private investigator. His name was Alan, and he came highly recommended for cases like mine. I didn't spare him the details. The humiliation of explaining that my wife was cheating with my daughter's boyfriend only hardened my resolve. "I'll need a week," Alan said, his voice calm and professional. "Do you want discretion or do you want thoroughness?" "Both," I replied, the weight of the situation settling over me. "I need everything: texts, photos, dates, times. Leave no stone unturned." For the next week, I kept up the facade. I came home every evening, hugged Emily, kissed Lauren, and made small talk over dinner. But my nights were spent poring over every clue I could find. I checked Lauren's phone when she was asleep, scrolling through messages that she thought were safely deleted. But she hadn't counted on the cloud backup. There they were, messages between her and Jake. Nothing explicit, but their tone said it all. She called him baby. He called her Elle. The casual intimacy of their exchanges turned my stomach. The breaking point came when I found out about the pregnancy. A late-night conversation between Lauren and Jake revealed that she was 2 months along, and there was no way the child was mine. The messages were dripping with panic and secrecy. "What if he finds out?" Lauren had typed. Jake's reply was callous. "Then we'll deal with it. He's too stupid to notice anyway." Those words lit a fire in me. Stupid? Let's see who ends up looking like the fool when this is over. By the time Alan returned with his findings, I had already started laying the groundwork for what would come next. The evidence he handed over was damning: photos of them meeting at hotels, messages exchanged on burner apps, even an audio recording from a hidden microphone he'd planted in Jake's car. Every piece was a nail in their coffin. That night, I sat in the darkness of our living room, flipping through the folder Alan had given me. Lauren was upstairs, sleeping soundly in our bed. My bed. The audacity of it all made my blood boil. But I didn't lose control. Instead, I smiled to myself, because the wheels were already in motion. Tomorrow, I would set the trap. The next morning, I left the house early, telling Lauren I had a meeting out of town. She barely looked up from her coffee, mumbling something about being careful on the road. Her indifference only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to dismantle their lives piece by piece. I started by visiting a lawyer. Her name was Margaret, and she had a reputation for being ruthless in divorce cases. After explaining my situation, she leaned back in her chair, her expression a mix of disbelief and cold calculation. "Your wife is having an affair with your daughter's boyfriend," she repeated, her voice tinged with incredulity. "That's correct," I replied. "And she's pregnant." "It's not mine." Margaret sat forward, her eyes sharp. "This changes everything. With the evidence you've provided, we can argue infidelity and emotional harm, but the pregnancy complicates things in your favor. The courts won't look kindly on her actions." She outlined a strategy that would leave Lauren with nothing: no alimony, no access to our joint assets, and limited custody of Emily. But I wasn't done. Taking away Lauren's comfort wasn't enough. Jake had to feel it too. I started gathering information on Jake. His ambitions, his connections, his weaknesses. He was a college student, aspiring to break into the professional world of graphic design. He'd been working an internship at a local firm, likely using Emily's connections to network. That would be his Achilles heel. I made a few calls to people in my professional circle, explaining the situation in vague terms. It wasn't hard to plant the seeds. "You might want to keep an eye on this kid," I'd say. "He's been known to mix personal life with professional boundaries." By the end of the day, Jake's internship was hanging by a thread, though he didn't know it yet. Let him think everything was fine. I wanted him to feel the rug pulled out from under him when he least expected it. Back at home, Lauren was in a strangely good mood. She greeted me with a smile, made my favorite dinner, and even offered to watch a movie with me. Her efforts were laughable, but I played along, nodding and smiling at all the right moments. She had no idea the walls were closing in. As we sat on the couch, Emily came home. She was glowing, her energy lighting up the room as she talked about her day. It was a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my chest. My heart ached for her, for the betrayal she was unknowingly caught in. "Jake said he's coming over tomorrow," she said casually, plopping down beside me. "Great," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It'll be good to see him." Lauren froze for a fraction of a second before recovering, but I caught it. She couldn't hide her reaction, not from me. The next day, I stayed home under the pretense of working remotely. Lauren was gone for most of the morning, and Emily had classes. That left me alone when Jake arrived to help with some projects. He didn't seem surprised when I opened the door, though his casual demeanor grated on me. "Mr. Peterson," he said with a grin. "Emily's not back yet, but I can wait." I stepped aside, letting him in. "Actually, Jake, I wanted to talk to you." He paused, glancing at me with mild curiosity. "Sure. What's up?" I motioned for him to sit in the living room. As he did, I placed a folder on the coffee table, Alan's report, a damning collection of photos and transcripts that left no room for denial. His cocky smile faltered as he opened the folder. He flipped through the pages, his face growing paler with each one. By the time he reached the audio transcripts, his hands were shaking. "You've been busy," I said, my tone icy. "Mr. Peterson, he stammered, his voice cracking. "Save it," I interrupted. "I'm not here to hear your excuses." I'm here to let you know that this ends now. He swallowed hard, his bravado gone. What do you mean? You'll break up with Emily, I said, my voice cold and deliberate. You'll stop coming around, and you'll never speak to her again. If you don't, I'll make sure this folder lands in the hands of every person who matters to you, your professors, your internship supervisor, your parents. Do you understand me? He nodded, his face ashen. Yes, sir. Good, I said, standing. Now get out of my house. He left without another word, his confidence shattered. But as I watched him walk down the driveway, I felt no satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Lauren was next. The night after my conversation with Jake, Lauren came home late. She claimed she had errands to run, but the faint smell of cologne on her clothes told a different story. I didn't say anything, simply nodding as she rattled off some excuse about traffic. It didn't matter. Tonight she wouldn't be able to lie her way out. After dinner, I told Emily I had some work to finish in the study. She hugged me goodnight, completely unaware of the storm brewing under our roof. Once she was upstairs, I motioned for Lauren to join me in the living room. What's up? She asked, settling onto the couch with a glass of wine. We need to talk, I said, keeping my voice steady. She stiffened, her eyes narrowing. About what? I placed Alan's folder on the coffee table between us. Her gaze flickered to it, her knuckles widening around the stem of her glass. What's this? She asked, her voice a shaky attempt at indifference. Open it, I said coldly. She hesitated, then set down her glass and flipped open the folder. Her expression shifted as she skimmed the pages, shock, panic, and finally, a pale, desperate stillness. I can explain. She started, but I cut her off. Don't, I said sharply. Don't insult me with explanations or excuses. I know everything, Lauren. The texts, the hotel meetups, the pregnancy. Everything. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. How long? I asked, my voice colder than I thought possible. Tears welled in her eyes. Ryan, How long? I demanded, slamming my hand on the table. She flinched, her tears spilling over. 6 months, she whispered. It started 6 months ago. And you thought you could get away with it? I asked, my voice rising. You thought I wouldn't notice? That I'd just sit here while you destroyed our family? I didn't mean for it to happen, she cried, her voice breaking. It just happened. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in my ears. It didn't just happen, Lauren. You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose to lie, to cheat, to betray me and Emily. And now you're pregnant, with his child. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her for a moment, feeling nothing but contempt. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my tone final. And I'll be seeking full custody of Emily. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. No, please! Don't do this, Ryan. We can fix this. For Emily's sake, we can. Don't you dare use her as a shield, I interrupted, my voice razor sharp. You don't get to pretend this is about her. You didn't think about Emily when you were sneaking around with Jake, did you? You didn't think about me, or this family, or the consequences. She broke down again, her pleas incoherent through her sobs. But I didn't waver. This wasn't a moment for compassion, it was a moment for resolution. Pack your things, I said, standing. You have until the end of the week to leave. Ryan, please, she begged, crawling toward me on her knees. I'll do anything. I'll end it with Jake, I'll go to counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't do this. I looked down at her, feeling a strange mix of pity and disgust. You should have thought about that 6 months ago. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her crumpled on the floor. Upstairs, I checked on Emily, who was fast asleep, her face peaceful and unaware. I kissed her forehead, silently promising her that no matter what happened, I would protect her from this mess. Back in my room, No, my room now. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Lauren's sobs echoed faintly from downstairs, but I forced myself to block them out. This was her doing, her choices, her consequences. I wouldn't let her guilt sway me. By the end of the week, Lauren would be gone. But this wasn't over yet. Lauren stayed quiet the next few days, moving through the house like a ghost. She didn't try to argue with me again. I think she knew it was useless. Every time I looked at her, she seemed smaller, like the weight of her actions was finally crushing her. But I didn't let it soften me. This wasn't the time for sympathy. On Thursday evening, Emily came home from school and asked if Jake could come over for dinner. I glanced at Lauren, who froze mid-step in the kitchen. The panic in her eyes was unmistakable, but she quickly masked it, plastering on a strained smile. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll make something special." "No need," I said, stepping in. "I'll handle dinner tonight." Lauren shot me a wary glance but didn't argue. She disappeared into her room shortly after, leaving me alone with Emily. When Jake arrived, I greeted him at the door, my expression unreadable. He looked nervous, good. I let him sweat for a moment before gesturing for him to come in. Emily beamed as she pulled him into the living room, completely unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. "Jake," I said, interrupting their conversation. "Could you help me with something in the garage?" He hesitated, glancing at Emily, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead," she said. "I'll be here." Reluctantly, he followed me to the garage. As soon as the door closed behind us, I turned to face him. "You told her yet?" I asked coldly. He swallowed hard, his confidence from our last conversation completely gone. "No, sir. I was going to." "You'll tell her tonight," I interrupted. "You'll sit her down, and you'll end it. Cleanly. No excuses, no lies." I will," he stammered. "I promise." "You'd better," I said, stepping closer. "Because if you don't, that folder I showed you? It'll find its way to every college admissions office and every employer you ever applied to. Do you understand me?" He nodded quickly, his face pale. "I understand." I stepped back, letting him breathe. "Good. Now get back inside. And remember, if you hurt Emily any more than you already have, you'll regret it." Jake returned to the living room, visibly shaken, but Emily didn't seem to notice. She was too busy laughing at something on her phone, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. I watched them from the kitchen, my chest tightening. She deserved so much better than him, but for now, this was the best I could do. Later that night, I overheard their conversation. Jake stumbled through his breakup speech, feeding her some nonsense about needing space and focusing on the future. Emily was crushed, of course, but she didn't argue. She just sat there, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her the truth about what kind of person Jake really was. But I knew it wasn't the right time. This wasn't her burden to bear, not yet. By the time Jake left, Emily was curled up on the couch, her face buried in a pillow. Lauren hovered in the doorway, looking torn between guilt and helplessness. "Go to bed," I told her sharply. "I'll take care of Emily." She opened her mouth to protest but thought better of it. With a defeated nod, she disappeared upstairs. I sat down beside Emily, gently rubbing her back as she cried. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said softly. "Sometimes people aren't who we think they are. But you'll be okay. You're stronger than you know." She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. "Why does love have to hurt so much?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer for her. All I could do was hold her and let her cry until she fell asleep. Upstairs, Lauren's door was closed, but I knew she wasn't sleeping. The faint sound of her muffled sobs filtered through the walls. I ignored them, focusing on Emily. She was all that mattered now. The next morning, Lauren left. Her suitcase sat by the door, and her eyes were hollow as she kissed Emily goodbye. I didn't say a word to her, didn't even look at her as she stepped out the door. She paused on the porch, as if waiting for something, for me to call her back, maybe. But I didn't. When the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. She was gone, but the mess she left behind would take far longer to clean up. And I wasn't done yet. With Lauren gone, the house felt quieter, almost too quiet. Emily kept to herself, mourning her breakup with Jake, while I focused on keeping things as normal as possible. But under the surface, I was still working. My next target was Jake, and I wasn't going to stop until his life reflected the chaos he'd caused in mine. 2 days after Lauren moved out, I received a call from Alan, the private investigator. "I've been digging into Jake, like you asked," he said, his tone measured. "You're not going to like what I found." "What is it?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "He's been seeing someone else," Alan said. "A girl from his internship. They've been meeting up for weeks now." I closed my eyes, the rage boiling just beneath the surface. So, not only had he betrayed Emily and me, but he couldn't even stay loyal to Lauren. The irony was almost laughable. "Send me everything," I said curtly. "Photos, dates, the works." When the file arrived later that evening, I pored over it with a cold detachment. The evidence was damning: Jake and the intern kissing outside her apartment, texts filled with flirtation and plans for secret meetups. It was almost too perfect. This wasn't just leverage, it was a weapon. And I knew exactly how to use it. The next morning, I made a call to Lauren. She didn't answer at first, but on the third attempt, her voice came through, shaky and guarded. "What do you want, Ryan?" she asked. "I need you to come over," I said, my tone flat. "There's something we need to discuss." She hesitated. "Ryan, I don't think." "It's about Jake," I interrupted. "And the pregnancy." That got her attention. After a long pause, she sighed. "I'll be there in an hour." When she arrived, she looked fragile, her once confident demeanor replaced by a nervous energy that made her seem smaller. I didn't offer her a seat or a drink. This wasn't a social call. "What's this about?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively. I handed her a copy of Alan's latest findings. Her face paled as she flipped through the photos and texts, her hands trembling. What is this?" she stammered. "It's Jake," I said coldly. "Cheating on you with someone from his internship. Did you really think he'd stick around? That he'd be loyal to you after what you both did to me and Emily?" Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse. But I didn't feel pity, only a grim satisfaction. "I trusted him," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "You thought wrong," I said, cutting her off. "And now you're left holding the bag, literally." She looked up at me, her expression a mix of despair and anger. "Why are you doing this, Ryan? Isn't it enough that you kicked me out? That you're divorcing me? Enough?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You think this is about punishment? This is about consequences, Lauren. Actions have consequences, and you and Jake are about to face them." Her tears turned to sobs, but I didn't stop. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to tell Emily the truth. About the affair. About the baby. Everything." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I can't. She'll hate me." "She deserves to know," I said firmly. "And if you don't tell her, I will." Lauren broke down completely, sinking onto the couch as she buried her face in her hands. "You're destroying me," she choked out. "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed yourself." That evening, Lauren sat down with Emily and told her the truth. I stayed in the other room, listening to the muffled voices as my daughter's world crumbled. Her sobs pierced through the walls, each one a dagger to my heart, but I didn't intervene. This was something Lauren needed to face on her own. When it was over, Emily stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. I found Lauren sitting on the couch, her face streaked with tears, looking utterly defeated. "She hates me," she whispered. "She has every right to," I said coldly. I spent the next hour driving around, searching for Emily. I found her at the park where we used to go when she was little, sitting on a swing and staring at the ground. Her face was red, her eyes swollen from crying. "Dad," she said when she saw me, her voice trembling. "Is it true?" I sat down beside her, taking a deep breath. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I wanted to protect you from this, but you deserve to know the truth." She didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at the ground. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with pain. "I don't think I can ever forgive her." "You don't have to," I said, pulling her into a hug. "But we'll get through this together. I promise." As I held her, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Lauren had torn our family apart, but I would make sure Emily came out of this stronger. And as for Jake and Lauren? Their reckoning wasn't over yet. The morning after Emily learned the truth, the house was suffused with an uneasy quiet. Emily barely spoke to me, though she didn't lash out either. Lauren, on the other hand, had disappeared, likely to her mother's house. I didn't care where she went, as long as she stayed gone. There was still one piece of unfinished business, and that was Jake. By now, Jake was blissfully unaware of the storm barreling toward him. I wasn't going to let him escape accountability, not after what he had done to Emily, to me, and to Lauren. He thought he could walk away unscathed, but I had no intention of allowing that. I waited a few days, letting the dust settle at home before making my next move. Alan had uncovered more about Jake's intern girlfriend. Her name was Sophie, and she was just as clueless about his true character as Emily had been. I wasn't going to let her stay in the dark. One evening, I drove to the cafe Sophie worked at part-time. I waited until she was on a break, then approached her table. She looked up, confused but polite, as I introduced myself. "I'm Ryan Peterson," I said. "Jake's girlfriend's father." Her brow furrowed. "Emily's dad?" she asked, her confusion deepening. "What's this about?" I slid a sealed envelope across the table. "It's about Jake," I said simply. "I think you deserve to know the truth before you get in any deeper." She hesitated, staring at the envelope like it might explode. Finally, she picked it up and opened it. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the photos and screenshots I'd carefully selected. By the time she reached the last page, her hands were shaking. This can't be real," she whispered. "It is," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Jake has been lying to you, just like he lied to my daughter." "You're not the first, Sophie, and you probably won't be the last unless you put a stop to it." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at me. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because no one else will," I said. "And because I know what it feels like to be blindsided by someone you trust." She nodded slowly, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. I left the cafe without looking back. By the time Sophie was done with him, Jake's web of lies would collapse. But I wasn't done with him yet. The next day, I sent an anonymous email to the head of Jake's internship program, attaching select pieces of evidence from Alan's report. I worded the email carefully, framing it as a concern for the company's reputation. "This individual has shown a pattern of unethical behavior in his personal life, which could reflect poorly on the company," I wrote. "As someone who values integrity, I felt it was my duty to bring this to your attention." Within hours I received a response. The supervisor thanked me for the information and assured me they would investigate the matter thoroughly. That was all I needed to hear. A week later, I learned through a contact that Jake had been terminated from his internship. Apparently, the combination of his unprofessional conduct and the scandal brewing around him had made him a liability the company didn't want to risk. I could only imagine the humiliation he felt as he packed up his desk and walked out the door. But the final blow came a few days later, when Jake's parents showed up at my house. I wasn't expecting them, but I invited them in, curious about what they had to say. They looked tired, worn down by whatever fallout had reached their doorstep. "Mr. Peterson," Jake's father began, his voice strained. We've come to apologize. I raised an eyebrow, taken aback. Apologize? Yes. His mother interjected, her voice shaking. For what Jake did to Emily. We had no idea about any of it. The affair, the pregnancy, it's horrifying. And now, with everything that's come to light, we're ashamed. I nodded, crossing my arms. I appreciate that, I said, though my tone was guarded. But an apology won't undo the damage. We know, Jake's father said quickly. We just wanted you to know that we're taking steps to address this. Jake is moving out. We've cut off his financial support until he gets his act together. He won't be bothering your family again. Their words were satisfying, but they didn't erase the pain Jake had caused. Still, knowing that his own parents were holding him accountable was enough for me. As they left, I felt a strange sense of closure. Jake's life was in ruins, just like mine had been, and Lauren's lies had been exposed for everyone to see. But I still wasn't finished rebuilding what they'd destroyed. After Jake was cut out of our lives, the focus shifted to healing the wounds he and Lauren had left behind. Emily was still struggling. She kept her distance from both me and Lauren, retreating into herself in a way that worried me. I knew it would take time, but I wasn't going to let her carry this burden alone. One evening, I found her in the living room, scrolling through old photos on her phone. She didn't notice me at first, her face etched with sadness as she swiped through images of her and Jake, laughing, smiling, looking like they had the perfect relationship. Emily, I said gently, sitting down beside her. She startled, quickly locking her phone. Sorry, she muttered. I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't, I assured her. I just wanted to check on you. She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. I'm fine. You don't have to pretend, I said, my voice soft. It's okay to be hurt. What Jake did, what your mom did, it's not something you can just get over. Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. I don't get it, Dad. Why would she do that? Why would she ruin everything? I took a deep breath, unsure of how to answer. Sometimes people make selfish choices, I said carefully. They think about what they want in the moment, not about how it will hurt the people they love. It's not fair, and it's not right, but it's the truth. Emily wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. I feel so stupid. How did I not see it? You're not stupid, I said firmly. You trusted them, and there's nothing wrong with that. What they did says everything about them and nothing about you. She nodded, though her shoulders still sagged with the weight of it all. Do you hate her? She asked suddenly, looking at me with wide, searching eyes. The question caught me off guard. I thought about Lauren, about all the anger and betrayal I'd carried since this started. I don't know if I hate her, I admitted. But I don't think I'll ever forgive her. Emily leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was reaching her. We sat like that for a long time, the silence between us heavy but comforting. The next step in rebuilding our lives came in the form of therapy. I knew Emily needed an outlet, someone impartial who could help her process everything. At first, she was resistant, but after a few sessions, she began to open up. She's starting to understand that none of this is her fault, the therapist told me during a follow-up meeting. But she still feels a lot of guilt, like she should have seen the signs or stopped it somehow. Hearing that broke my heart, but it also fueled my determination. I wasn't just going to repair my relationship with Emily. I was going to ensure she felt supported every step of the way. I also started therapy myself. I hadn't realized how much anger I was still holding on to until I sat down with a professional. Talking about Lauren, about the betrayal, and about my own feelings of failure was difficult, but it was also freeing. Slowly, I began to see a path forward, not one that erased the pain, but one that allowed me to grow from it. Lauren, on the other hand, was unraveling. She reached out several times, pleading for forgiveness, but I refused to engage. Her calls went unanswered, her texts deleted. She even tried to reach Emily through mutual friends, but Emily wasn't ready to face her yet. One day, I received a letter from Lauren. It was long and emotional, filled with apologies and explanations. She claimed she was seeking therapy, trying to understand why she had made the choices she did. But none of it mattered to me. Her regrets couldn't undo the damage. Still, one sentence stood out. "I hope you'll find it in your heart to let me be a part of Emily's life again someday." It wasn't an unreasonable request, but it wasn't one I could answer. That was up to Emily, and I wouldn't force her to make that decision before she was ready. Life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. Emily started spending more time with her friends, laughing and smiling again, though the shadow of the past still lingered. I focused on work, on keeping our home stable, and on being the parent she needed me to be. For the first time in months, I felt like we were moving forward. But the scars remained, a constant reminder of how close we'd come to losing everything. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: Lauren and Jake would never have the power to hurt us again. Months passed, and life settled into a tentative calm. Emily was slowly regaining her confidence, throwing herself into school and extracurriculars. I could see glimpses of the vibrant, happy girl she had been before everything fell apart, and it gave me hope that we would come out of this stronger. But Lauren hadn't let go. Despite her initial promises to stay away, she began showing up unannounced, begging for chances to talk. Each time, I firmly turned her away, refusing to let her disrupt the fragile peace Emily and I had worked so hard to rebuild. One afternoon, I came home to find Lauren waiting on the porch. She looked disheveled, her face pale and drawn, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. "Ryan, please," she said as I stepped out of my car. "I just want to talk." I sighed, unlocking the front door without looking at her. "You've said everything you needed to in your letters and texts. There's nothing left to talk about. I need to see Emily," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "She's my daughter, Ryan. I can't just disappear from her life." "You already did," I shot back, turning to face her. "The moment you betrayed her, you disappeared. She doesn't trust you anymore, Lauren. And I'm not going to force her to see you before she's ready." Tears streamed down her face, but I refused to let them sway me. "She needs time," I added firmly. "And so do I." Lauren nodded weakly, wiping her eyes. "Just tell her I'm sorry. And that I love her." "I will," I said, though I wasn't sure if Emily was ready to hear it. She left without another word, her figure retreating down the driveway like a ghost. As I watched her go, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This was the woman I had once built a life with, but she was now a stranger, a shadow of the person I thought I knew. Jake, on the other hand, had all but disappeared. Word of his actions had spread far beyond our family, and his reputation was in tatters. The intern he'd been seeing had dumped him after learning the full extent of his lies, and his parents had cut him off financially. He was left to fend for himself, and from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, it wasn't going well. A part of me felt vindicated, but another part wondered if I had gone too far. Had I crossed a line in my quest for revenge? Or was this simply the price of betrayal? I didn't dwell on the questions for long. My focus was on Emily and rebuilding our lives. But fate wasn't done with us yet. One evening, Emily came into the kitchen, clutching her phone with a hesitant expression. "Dad," she said softly. "Mom texted me." I froze, setting down the plate I was washing. "What did she say?" "She just apologized," Emily replied, holding out the phone so I could see. The message was simple. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day you'll let me make it up to you. I love you." I studied Emily's face, searching for any sign of how she felt. "How do you feel about that?" I asked gently. She shrugged, biting her lip. "I don't know. Part of me wants to yell at her. Part of me wants to ignore her forever. But another part misses her." I nodded, pulling her into a hug. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Just make sure it's what you want, not what you think she wants, or I want." Emily nodded against my chest, her arms tightening around me. "Thanks, Dad." A week later, Emily decided she was ready to meet Lauren. They arranged to meet at a cafe, and though I offered to go with her for support, Emily insisted on going alone. She was nervous, but determined, and I couldn't have been prouder. When she returned home later that afternoon, her expression was unreadable. I waited, giving her space to process, until she finally spoke. "She said all the right things," Emily said, her voice quiet. "She cried a lot and told me how sorry she was. But I don't know if I believe her." "That's okay," I said. "Trust takes time. Don't feel pressured to forgive her just because she's sorry." Emily nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I told her I need space. That I'm not ready to let her back into my life yet." "How did she take it?" I asked. "She cried again," Emily admitted. "But she said she understood." I reached out, squeezing her hand. "I'm proud of you. You did what was right for you." A small smile tugged at her lips. "Thanks, Dad." Lauren's betrayal had shaken the foundation of our family, but piece by piece, we were rebuilding. Emily was finding her strength, and I was learning to let go of the anger that had consumed me for so long. The past couldn't be erased, but the future was ours to shape. Life had settled into a tentative routine, but I knew the story wasn't over yet. The past had a way of creeping back, and just when I thought we'd moved beyond the worst of it, a final twist shook everything once more. It started with an unexpected email. The sender was anonymous, but the subject line read, "You need to see this." I hesitated before opening it, my stomach twisting with unease. Inside was a link to a video file. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. The footage was grainy, but the scene was unmistakable. It was Jake, sitting in what looked like a dingy apartment, talking directly to the camera. He looked rough, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes, but his voice was steady. "This is for Ryan Peterson," he began, his tone dripping with venom. "You think you've won. You think you've destroyed me. But you have no idea what I'm capable of." My heart pounded as he continued, detailing his grievances in a bitter tirade. He blamed me for everything, for his failed relationship with Emily, for his ruined internship, and for the fallout with his parents. But it was the final part of the video that froze me in my seat. "I'm not done with you, Ryan," Jake said, leaning closer to the camera. "You took everything from me, and now it's my turn. Watch your back." The video ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the screen, my mind racing. Was this a bluff? An empty threat from a desperate man? Or was Jake truly planning something? I didn't waste any time. I forwarded the video to my lawyer and contacted the authorities, explaining the situation. They took the threat seriously, launching an investigation into Jake's whereabouts. Meanwhile, I installed additional security measures at the house: cameras, motion detectors, the works. I wasn't taking any chances. Emily noticed the changes and asked what was going on. I debated telling her the truth but ultimately decided against it. She'd been through enough already. "Just a precaution," I told her. "To keep us safe." She nodded, trusting me implicitly, though I could see the worry in her eyes. It was a reminder of what was at stake, of why I couldn't let my guard down. A week passed with no word from the authorities. Then, late one night, I received another email. This time, it was a single sentence. "You'll regret this." Attached was a photo of my house, taken from the street. The implication was clear: Jake was watching. I forwarded the email to the police immediately, but the fear had already taken root. I spent the night sitting by the window, my phone in one hand and a baseball bat in the other. Every creak of the house made my heart race, but the hours passed without incident. The next day, I pulled Emily aside. "We're going to stay at a hotel for a while," I told her. "Just until things settle down." She didn't question me, though her worry deepened. We packed our bags and left that afternoon, notifying the police of our new location. The hotel was nondescript, chosen for its anonymity. I didn't tell Lauren about the move. I didn't trust her not to slip up and reveal our whereabouts to Jake. Days turned into weeks, and the tension slowly eased. The police tracked Jake to another city, where he'd been arrested for trespassing and harassment in an unrelated case. With him behind bars, I finally felt like we could breathe again. Emily and I returned home, though the house felt different, less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress. I reinforced the security measures and made a promise to myself: I would never let anyone threaten our peace again. In the months that followed, life began to rebuild itself. Emily flourished, throwing herself into her passions and forming new friendships. She rarely mentioned Jake or Lauren, though I knew the scars were still there. As for me, I focused on creating a stable, loving environment for her, a home free from the shadows of betrayal. Lauren occasionally reached out, but her attempts were met with silence. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. There was no room for her in the life I was rebuilding. The final chapter of this story wasn't one of revenge or retribution. It was one of resilience. Jake's threats had shaken us, but they hadn't broken us. Lauren's betrayal had hurt us, but it hadn't defined us. In the end, we had survived, not as the family we once were, but as something stronger. And as I watched Emily laugh with her friends in the backyard, I realized that survival was the ultimate victory.